Amen. You guys can be seated. So, as you guys know, the vision for this month, or this year, I should say, is flow. Freely letting opportunities work out. And Pastor's been doing a great job of breaking that down for us and taking time to not only give us the general what does that vision look like, but also giving different subcategories for it. We've seen fearlessly letting opportunities work out and so on and so forth. And so I want to kind of stay in that same theme of what we're studying out. And tonight I want to talk about faithfulness lets opportunities work out. And with this, I want to do a study through the book of Ruth. I've been reading the book of Ruth, and it's not a long book, but I've read it over and over and over and over, and it's just so much rich goodness in that book. And I was like, this is perfect for tonight. But to kind of get us set up for where we're going to get to, we need to go back and recap a little bit from Sunday. And one of the things that Pastor talked about is the flow, and what is the flow? And we learned that the flow is basically, in short, it's the Holy Spirit bringing the opportunities. That's the stream of those are the water streams right there. It's the opportunities that the Holy Spirit brings for us to maybe be a blessing to somebody else, opportunities for us to be blessed, opportunities for raises, increase, opportunities to allow God to operate in our lives. And he told us that, this is the root of everything that we do. If we want to be able to flow, we have to be willing to take that step. And when those opportunities come, actually dive in the water and get wet and go ahead and receive all that God has for us. So with that in mind, I want you guys to take a moment when we get ready to go to the book of Ruth and see how she operated in that flow and really dove in and wasn't scared, but she was very courageous. So if you guys want, you guys go and open your Bibles to the book of Ruth, and we're going to really go through this whole book. It's going to be a little bit of a different style approach to service than what I normally do, because I kind of want to just really flow through it. If I could, I'd just read all 4 chapters with you, but that might take too long, and I want to get you out before 9 o'clock. So I'm just kidding, guys. We'll get out by 8. So I got to set the stage for you. Now, when you go through the book of Ruth, this is probably one of the most poetically written books in the Bible. I mean, it's just a very beautiful literature right there. You have desperation, you have famine, you have sadness, you have heartbreak. I know you're like, well, it's all this sadness, how can it be so beautiful? But then as you begin to press through it, you have grace. You start noticing elements of faithfulness. You start noticing elements of opportunities. You start to see kindness, and then you see highlights of joy, and then you see promises fulfilled, and you see this whole thing encapsulated where it's like a full, beautifully written story, and it begins to highlight, like, wow, I can see what God's grace really looks like, even in situations that didn't even seem like they would make sense as I'm going through the book. You're like, wow, you're showing me that you connected A and B here, you connected Z and F there, and that didn't even make any sense. But then when I got to the chapter, it's like, wow, okay, now I see why you did what you did. And there's just so much, there's loyalty in there, there's prosperity, and we're going to really get to dive into all of those different portions of this book of Ruth. Now, to get into chapter 1, we're not going to read through all of chapter 1, but I'm going to recap chapter 1, verse 1 through 8 to kind of get you guys caught up to what's going on. So this book comes after the Judges. So we're in the time of the Judges, and what goes on during this time is that there's no kings. So everybody is doing what they deem to be right in their eyes, right? So if you felt like, not working on Tuesday was cool and you still want to get paid, that was up to you. You had to make your decision on what you deemed to be right, and you lived with those choices. So you were hoping that God was believing that what you did was right, because there was no leadership involved to be able to tell you this is right, this is wrong, this is what we do, this is what we don't do. So now there's a famine in the land of Bethlehem, right? And you have Elimelech. And he's married. He's got a wife named Naomi, and he has 2 children, one named Mahlon and one named Chilion, right? And so they're in the land. There's no food. They're trying to figure out what to do. So he decides that he wants to leave the land. So he leaves Bethlehem, and he goes to Moab. So he gets into Moab, and not long after getting into Moab, he dies. After his death, he has children. Or his children, they've grown to be a little bit older, and now they're there, and they marry 2 Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And they stay there, and they're there for about 10 years or so, and then they die. So now the dad's dead, both the sons are dead. The only person that's alive right now is the wife, Naomi. And we start to notice early in the going, when you're just kind of putting yourself in the text and picking up the clues, that they moved out of the promised land, and there became a lot of death that happened in their family. And we'll begin to dive more into that, but I wanted to highlight, when you're in the will of God, when you're in that flow, there's prosperity, there's blessing and protection, and when you fall out of it, we may want to blame God for what goes on, but that's not really what's happening. It's just you're out of the promised land, out of the place where I said I could protect you, I can take care of you while you're here. It's like your own home. You're like, if my kids are here in the house, I can take care of them the best I can when they're here in the house. But when they go off to school or when they go out of town for a vacation that I'm not going on, I'm no longer really there able to protect them in the same way. I can believe for them and hope that they're safe and okay. That's what we want all the time. But they're no longer at the same protection. That's what you start to notice there. Now, a small side note is that when you look at the two sons, Malone and Chilion, their names were related to sickness and mortality. And that's important to highlight because they both died early. They're probably, we would assume somewhere probably in their 20s and maybe early 30s, and they passed away, so a very young age. And that's important because it's important for us to remember when we're naming our children, we're naming people, if we're not going to go choose a name from the will of God, ask God, hey, God, what's the name for my child? We need to be cautious of what we're choosing name to make sure we're not picking random names. Or we're not letting family members nickname our children certain things and just say, oh, well, it's a sweet little name. They said it means this. Make sure you're researching it for yourself so you're not speaking death over your family. So now let's go ahead and keep going forward. So now we're going to get into chapter 1, verse 6 through 13. So now we know the sons are dead, the dad's dead. Now it's just mom and the daughter-in-laws. So in verse 6 it says, she and her daughters-in-law set out to return from the territory of Moab because she had heard in Moab that the Lord had paid attention to his people's needs by providing them food. So she left the place where she had been living, accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, and they traveled along the road leading back to the land of Judah. Naomi said to them, each of you go back to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to me and the dead. May the Lord grant each of you rest in the house of a new husband. She kissed them and wept loudly. So right here we're in a sense where it's like, okay, now we know she's hearing out there in the land that, hey, it sounds like God is making provisions back where we used to be back at home, back in the land. So let's go ahead and start heading that way. So now they're headed back in that direction. And now she pauses like, hey, hold on. We're headed this way, but why don't you guys just go back, find yourself a husband. You're still young. You're still attractive. I have nothing really here to offer you guys right now. And we begin to notice that as we begin to continue on into some of the next verses. In verse 11, it tells her, but Naomi replied, return home, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. Go on, for I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? Would you restrain yourselves from remarrying? No, my daughters, my life is much too bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Again, they wept loudly, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Follow your sister-in-law. So now notice here that in verse 13, she begins to blame God. She says, okay, the Lord's hand has turned from me. And she's assuming that God is the reason why her husband's dead and why her children are dead. And so we're already setting a stage of bitterness. We're setting a scene of where she's feeling like God is punishing her for decisions. And we know that God is not the one to bring harm and danger our way. We know that that's something that comes from the devil. But she's, in a sense, in the moment, she has a twisted ideology of what's going on. But we notice here that the one daughter, she's like, yeah, okay, if this is the opportunity to get out, I'm going to get out. But now we notice a sense of faithfulness from Ruth, because Ruth is like, it says I clung to her, and that's really saying like, hey, I'm tied to you. Wherever you are, like, I want to be a part of your life. I want to be a part of everything that goes on, because I don't see my life being any better without you, so I may as well just stay with you. So now, also, when you're looking at those verses, actually, we'll come back to that part. Let's keep going. Let's keep going in verse 16. It says, but Ruth replied, don't plead with me to abandon you or to return and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me and do severely if anything but death separates you. And so it goes on and lets us know that Naomi's like, okay, she's tied to me. She's not going to leave. So she doesn't say anything else. And so they go ahead and leave. So we're noticing the faithfulness of Naomi to her mother and to basically her dead husband and her father-in-law and so on and so forth. So now we get back and they get back to Bethlehem and we pick up in verse 19. And it says, the two of them traveled until they came to Bethlehem. When they entered Bethlehem, the whole town was excited about their arrival. And the local woman exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. She answered, for the Almighty has made me very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has opposed me, and so Almighty has afflicted me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So here, we're seeing a sense of lack of accountability, right? So we got some bitterness in Naomi. We have a little bit of lack of accountability in Naomi because she's feeling like this is all God's fault, but she left out the land. And even after her husband passed, she had a chance to go back, but still chose to stay. But on the flip side, I want to highlight, up to this point, they don't really show Ruth's emotions about her husband being dead. But we do tend to notice that it doesn't seem like she's blaming God for the situation. She may not have a full understanding of what that God is like. She may not have a full understanding of what the whole Israelite lifestyle is like. But she's understanding, she's at a place where she doesn't feel like this is God's fault why the things are happening to her. And now as we get ready to close out chapter 1, this last verse is important. Verse 22, it says, Naomi came back from the territory of Moab with her daughter-in-law Ruth and the Moabites. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley fest. Now, we're talking about flow, right? And Holy Spirit bringing opportunities to us. I want you to take note that they were in that land for a long time. She was married for 10 years and so on and so forth, but they overheard, and we don't know how long people may have been talking about God providing provisions, but at some point, Naomi heard it, and she's like, now is the time to go back home. And they arrive, it says, right at the beginning of Barley Fest. And this is important because timing is everything. And when we are able to accept that and realize that in our lives, God's timing is the perfect thing for everything, everything begins to play out exactly how it wants to, and then we don't have to worry about and stress on it. And so with that timing, that takes us into chapter 2. And so to set the stage for chapter 2, we notice, of course, timing, like I mentioned, but we're going to notice faith, we're going to notice grace, and we're going to notice connection. All right? Now, in chapter 2, in verse 1, it gives us a little context about kind of what's about to go on. It tells us that Naomi had a relative on her husband's side. In verse 1, it says that he was a prominent man of noble character from Elimelech's family. His name was Boaz. So we kind of get the scene of, okay, we know that there's about to be another character that's about to add in. And then in verse 2, we start to notice some elements of faith here. Because Ruth the Moabitess asked Naomi, will you let me go into the fields and gather fallen grain behind someone whom I find favor? Now, to put this all into a little more context, which I didn't do at the very beginning, the sons that were married to the Moabitess women, it was really against the law for them to marry Moabite women. The reason being because those women had a tendency of leading the men astray from the gods that they served. So they led them astray from Jesus or God, and they led them to serving all their false idols. So they didn't really want them marrying out. So now she's in a land where she's essentially not the most prized possession, a place where they don't really want her because they feel like she brings bad luck. She's not good for them. She's going to corrupt all the men there. But she's kind of like, hey, give me a chance to go out because I'll find favor with whoever I'm with. She's like, I know an opportunity is out here for me. I have the faith for it. I just need it to be presented to me. And so her mom is basically like, yeah, go ahead. Go do what you have to do here, right? So now we get there, and in verse 3, it tells us that Ruth entered, it says, so Ruth left and entered the field to gather grain behind the harvesters. She happened to be in the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from Elimelech's family. So now you have these giant fields out here because it's not like they were all fenced off. Hey, this is Bob's field, this is John's field, this is Landon's field, and so on and so forth. It's just all this field, right? And so she's looking around. She's probably like, okay, well, which field should I get to? This one looks promising. And I can assure you, to some extent, that was the Holy Spirit's guidance this was God's guidance of, hey, why don't you go into this field? And so she goes over there to that field, right? And she doesn't know it at the time because she doesn't even know who Elimelech is. But she's in a field. Now it says in verse 4, it says later, or it doesn't know who Boaz is. So later it says, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, and he said to the harvesters, the Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they replied. And Boaz's servant who was in charge, Boaz asked his servant who was in charge of the harvesters, whose young woman is this? The servant answered, she is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the territory of Moab. She asked, will you let me gather fallen grain among the bundles behind the harvesters? She came and has been here on her feet since early morning, except that she rested just a little. So now we notice that she's in the field. Boaz just so happened to come back at the right time to see her there. He could have came a day later. He could have came a day early. We don't know how much time he's going to spend at the field, but he came. We're talking about timing. The timing lines up just right for her to just be on the field and be noticed by him, right? And so she's noticed by him, and then we notice that the harvesters highlight her work ethic because they're like, she's been working all day. She took a small little break, but she's been active. And she's just trying to find a way to feed herself, essentially. You know, they're back home. They don't have a man that's providing. So they're trying to figure out, well, what am I supposed to do? And so they got all this grain, and she's picking up the crumbs, essentially. What's left over? Let me grab this little handful, put it in my basket. This little handful. Hopefully, by the end of the day, I'll have enough to make some bread tonight, make some French toast in the morning, and I can go ahead and hope for another day tomorrow, right? So then we keep on going, and we get to verse 8 and 9. Like I said, we're going to do a good bit of reading today. So it says, then Boaz said to Ruth, listen, my daughter, don't go and gather grain in another field, and don't leave this one, but stay here close to my female servants. See which field they are harvesting and follow them. Haven't I ordered the young men not to touch you? When you are thirsty, go and drink from the jars the young men have filled. So now we're noticing she's already receiving favor. And we're talking about the flow, and the flow really came from her deciding, okay, I'm going to go back with mom to a place that I've never even been to. I don't know the people here, but I know those people don't technically like me, but the mom likes me just because her kids were married to me, so we developed a good relationship. But I'm going to go anyway because this feels right. And we get the idea that she may have already been serving this same God because it said, I'm going to serve the God that you serve as well. So it didn't seem like she had any restrictions to wanting to do that, right? So now she's there. She finds the right field. She's sent to the right field. He's there at the right time. And now he's like, you know what? How can I be a blessing to her? So now he's like, I want to offer favor to you. So he's telling me, like, don't leave. There's all these other fields out here. Don't go to those fields. Stay in my field. But don't just stay in my field. Stay close to my female servants because they're going to show you everything that you need to know. I told the men to leave you alone, so they're not going to bother you. They're not going to harass you. So it's a good chance that she was probably an attractive woman as well. And they're like, hey, I want to make sure I keep you protected. And then in addition to that, I don't even want you to have to work that hard. So anytime you're thirsty, instead of going to the well to go have to get your own water, go drink what the men poured. Go take theirs, and if they have any issues, tell them I said it was okay, and that'll silence that for you. So we're noticing that she's immediately getting favor and protection, so the flow is already starting to work for her. Those opportunities are already starting to work out for her, right? So then we keep on going, and we're going to go through verse 10 through 13, and it says, she fell down on her face and said, why have I found favor with you so that you notice me although I'm a foreigner? Because again, she's not from there, so she really shouldn't be getting the benefits that she's getting right now. And it says, Boaz answered her, everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported to me, how you left your father and your mother and your native land, and how you came to a people you didn't previously know. May the Lord reward you for what you have done, and may you receive a full reward from the Lord God of Israel, whose wings you have come for refuge. So now he's highlighting, I'm seeing your faithfulness. I've been told about how faithful you are, and I want to honor and reward your faithfulness because I know that God's also going to honor and reward your faithfulness. Now, what I do like is that she shows a sense of humility and humbleness because she knows that, hey, this isn't normal. Let me go ahead and make sure I honor this man for honoring me. And then she goes on and she says in 13, I found favor with you, for you comforted and encouraged your servant, although I am not like that of your female servants. So now, I want to go, yeah, okay. Let's keep going. So now we're still looking at favor. I want to stay in this chapter just a touch longer. And we get to verse 14. And it says, at mealtime, Boaz told her, come over here and have some bread and dip it in the vinegar sauce. So she sat beside the harvesters, and they offered her roasted grain, and she ate, and she was satisfied and had some left over. So now he told her to spend time with the maidservants, but now he's promoted her above them and put them with the next level of people, the harvesters. So all those people that are basically like on his payroll, on his staff that he's feeding, he's like, hey, you're not bringing really any benefit to me because you're not harvesting for me, so you're not bringing any of this food in for me. You're doing it for yourself, but I still have favor for you. You're finding favor in my eyes, so now I want to feed you as well. You've worked hard. You've had your water. Now come sit down and eat. Take a break. Come rest in the shelter with me. And now they go in and feed her. And then he goes on and he does even more. So as he gets done, it says she got up. She had food left over, so she packs her food up. And Boaz ordered this to her young man. He says, let her even gather grain among the bundles, and don't humiliate her. Pull out some stalks from the bundles for her, and leave them for her to gather. Don't rebuke her. So Ruth gathered grain in the field until evening. She beat out what she had gathered, and it was about 26 quarts of barley. She picked up the grain and went into the town where her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She bought out what she had left over from her meal and gave it to her. So now we're here at a sense where the favors increases. Now the opportunities are flowing here. Now to put this in perspective, this isn't a common situation where they're like, hey, yeah, give away our harvest. He's a businessman. He's a rich man. He's trying to make money on that harvest. He wants some for himself, and he wants some to sell. So him not just giving some away is already a blessing, but now he's like, go above and beyond. He's telling you, take the stalks and intentionally put them on the ground so she can pick them up. So everything you grab, let's say for every 10 that you grab, take 3 and set aside for her. Go grab another 10 and set 3 aside for her. So she has to do less, where all she can do is walk behind and pick it up. So it's purposeful favor, purposeful timing and opportunities. But to put in perspective what 26 quarts is, right? That would be enough to feed a working man for several weeks. So he didn't just give her enough food for just a day. We're talking about the flow, and we're talking about that water gushing out and going. That's the flow right there. It's going. She doesn't have to worry about food for weeks on end for her or her mother, because like now we have breakfast, lunch, snacks. We can bake desserts, whatever we want to do. If we want to sell some of this to earn some money because we're not working, we can do that as well. So the opportunities are now really pouring in for her. And what you notice is that we don't know the connection between Elimelech and Boaz and how close of people that they were, but we can imagine that they don't seem to be that close. And we can deduce that from the fact that once he found out who she was, found out who her mother was, he never really seemed to make a connection of, oh, you're Elimelech's daughter-in-law. He never really tied it in. So now we know this is a divine appointment created by God here. And so Naomi's mom asked her, she says, well, whose field did you go glean from? And she's like, oh, I went to the man's field. His name was Boaz. He was really nice to me. He told me to hang around her servants and so on and so forth, and to stay close to the men as well so that they'll protect me and stay in the land. And so she goes on and tells her, Naomi tells her, said, hey, this is a good thing. This is good for you to work because he's a family relative. And why is this important? Because he has the opportunity to be your family redeemer. Because what would happen is that if you were married and you didn't have children and your husband died, technically the next closest relative was supposed to be in line to then marry you and bring forth children under that name to be able to keep the legacy going on. So she's like, wow, this is a divine appointment of all people you got on his field, and he doesn't even know what's going on. So now we get to chapter 3, And now we're going to really develop that connection a little bit more. We're going to develop this opportunity some. And now we're going to develop a little bit of courage. Because what we know, to operate in the flow, we're going to have some courage. Outside of faith, faith is great because we can believe God for all this, that, and the other. But when the opportunity comes to jump in the deep end, if you're still scared, you're scared you're not going to tread the water, scared you're going to drown and not float, you're going to miss the window. So as we get in, Naomi has a plan. And she's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. First, you're going to take a bath. Because you've been working in the field, you smell like outdoors, you're going to go take a bath. And after you take this bath, I got this really nice perfume you're going to put on. And I'm sure it smelled lovely because she's like, hey, we got one opportunity at this and we got to do it right. So she's like, put on this really nice perfume, but I need you to be patient because timing is everything. So he's about to go have dinner. Boaz is about to go eat. He's going to drink. He's going to fellowship. He's going to enjoy himself. And then he's going to go to bed. And I know this is going to sound weird, it's going to sound creepy, but I need you to trust me. I need you to trust your mother here. And she's like, okay, listen, when he goes to sleep, now I need you to go to his house. You're going to look like a stalker, but it's okay. Go to his house, and then he's going to be laying in bed. And when he's laying in bed, I want you to lay at the foot of his bed. Don't say anything, just go lay there. So she goes, and she's like, okay. So she takes a bath, she puts her perfume on, she waits, she says, okay, he's in the bed sleeping. So somewhere off in the distance she was watching, so we're getting stalker vibes for sure, but it's okay. The timing was perfect. So she gets there, and she lays in the bed. And she lays in the bed, and she's chilling, and she's probably wondering, okay, well, Mom didn't really give me any steps after this. What do I do? He's snoring really loud. I'm not really sure what's going on. But eventually, he wakes up in the middle of the night, and he's startled. And he's like, whoa, who is this? Because I went to bed by myself. Who's this by my feet? And she's like, hey, my Lord, this is your servant Ruth, right? And she's like, okay, like I'm here because you can be my redeemer. And so we notice this in verse 8. In chapter 3, verse 8, it says, at midnight, Boaz was startled. Turning over, and there lying at his feet was a woman. So he asked, who are you? I am Ruth, your servant, she replied. Take me under your wing. You are my family redeemer. Then he said, may the Lord bless you, my daughter. You have shown more kindness now than before because you have not pursued younger men, whether rich or poor. Now don't be afraid, my daughter. I will do whatever you say since all of the people in my town know that you're a woman of noble character. So now we're noticing a situation where her race is not affecting her viewership in a way that normally it would affect, oh, she's a Moabite woman, we got to stay far away from her. People are like, hey, her character is amazing. We don't care what race she is, what nationality she is. We love her. She's great. She got upstanding character. And that's the same thing that happens in that flow, that your background, your history has no effect on what God can do in your life and no effect on how God can choose somebody to move in your life. You know, whether you don't feel qualified for the job or you don't have the resume for the job, if God tells you to go to apply for that six-figure job and you're like, I don't even have a college degree and I've been working a job that I'm making $50,000 a year, but he says go apply for it, don't be scared to apply for it and worry about, well, maybe I should lie on my resume or maybe my resume's only got 3 jobs on there and 2 of them were McDonald's and I don't know if it's going to work. Just go apply for it and trust that God is going to give you that favor and he's going to bring the supporting cast around that he needs to move and make the opportunity happen for you. Now, what we also notice is that Ruth, she was a humble woman because clearly he's saying you didn't pursue a rich man or other men or even poor men. So she probably had some type of looks to know that I could probably really get whatever man I wanted. But I'm drawn to this one because I'm about faithfulness. I'm about the rituals and the rules. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I want to honor and be faithful to what the law is, right? So we're continuing highlighting her faithfulness. But we also learn that, hey, there's somebody that might be a closer option. And so we're like, okay, well, let's figure out who this closer option is. But he told her, he said, listen, it's late, it's midnight. If you leave now, there's going to be you're going to have a very different outlook on how people are going to look at you if you leave at this time of night. So it's best that you stay. So you stay the night. She stays the night, and in the next morning, they get up early before the sun comes out. He's like, hey, I'm going to send you back, but I'm also going to send you back with a little more prosperity. So he tells her, you know, give me this, and I'm going to measure out some more barley for you. So he gives her some more barley, continually pouring more opportunities. I'm going to take care of you, but even if I can't take care of you because you can't be mine, I'm still going to take care of you in the time being until somebody can. So God continually opening more opportunities for her. So she gets back home and her mother's like, okay, like what happened? How'd it go? She's like, well, once I finally got settled in and wasn't nervous anymore, we had a good conversation. He says that he will be my redeemer, but he has to check with one other person. I don't know who that person is, but he said he got to check there. And she said, that's cool. Don't worry about it. He's not going to waste any time. He'll have an answer for you by the end of the day. So I would assume that he's probably excited. He's like, man, I had this fine little shorty. She's been in my field work, and she looks good, and she wants me. And I want her, so I got to figure this out. So let me go find the other close person. I'm pretty sure whatever that guy had going on, he didn't care. He's like, I'm stopping your day because I got to have her. So we get to chapter 4, and now we're going to close and wrap this with God's diligence and his faithfulness, because this is where it's all about to really come tied right on in, right? And I'm not going to read verse 4 through 12 because I don't have the time to read verse 4 through 12. But what I am going to do is summarize verse 4 through 12 for you. So Boaz, he gets there, and the Bible doesn't tell us who this closer redeemer is. So we'll call him Mr. So-and-so. So he meets Mr. So-and-so. He's like, hey, man, do you remember Naomi and Elimelech's land, the land that nobody's been using for past years, and it's all dusty, but it's land because nobody's been harvesting because nobody's here? He said, yeah. He said, so he died, and his sons died, so technically you're next in line for the land. Do you want the land? He said, absolutely. He said, okay, cool. But there's one more thing. If you take the land, you also have to take this lady named Ruth. Now, she's a Moabite woman, just to put that out there for you, right? He's like, but if you want it, you can have it, but I'm just letting you know, like, that's what all, it's the land and her, it's a package deal. So then Mr. So-and-so is like, whoa, like, hold on. I want the land, but I can't do the Moabite woman because that's just against, like, my thing. I can't do it. It's going to bind my other contract that I have going on, right? And so he's like, okay, well, if you don't want it, then I want the land and I want her. And so he's like, okay, well, cool. If you want them, you can have both. So what they do, they exchange the sandal because that's their way of, like, basically like signing a contract. So he's like, okay, boom. And they got the elders there, so they're like, okay, well, from this point forward, you can have Boaz, you can have the land, and you can have Ruth, and you can have Elimelech's land and everything, right? And so they go through it. He buys the property and so on and so forth. And we notice why this is important, because when the opportunity is meant for you, you got to make sure that the other people that are in the way of it are out the way of it. Because he could have easily been like, well, you know what? It is what it is. His son's married her. If they could do it, then I could surely do it. It's whatever. It's a nice property. It's here. She's attractive. But he's like, you know what? The guy's like, hey, he needs to be out the way, so I'm going to make sure that his conscience is strong to not try to say yes. So he says no. So now we get down into verse 13 through 16. And it says this: Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He slept with her, and the Lord granted conception, and she gave birth to a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you without a family redeemer today. May his name become well known in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. Indeed, your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons has given birth to him. Naomi took the child, placed on her lap, and became a mother to him. The neighbor women said, a son has been born to Naomi, and they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, and the father of Jesse, the father of David. So as we get ready to wrap into this, so now we notice divine intervention by God, because Ruth was married for 10 years. And legacy was very important in that time. They wanted to have children. They wanted to have a legacy, and they particularly wanted to have a son. They didn't have anything else. They needed to have a boy. And for 10 years, they couldn't have children. And whether that's because she couldn't conceive or whether God would allow them to conceive, we do know that God played a factor in the conception here, because in verse 13 it says, and the Lord granted conception to her. So God knew, hey, everything that may have been going on those 10 years that you couldn't have a child, and you probably felt less than, and you felt like the opportunities weren't working out, then your husband died, and you felt alone, like, well, maybe I still can't have kids. You come to this land, you're like, I don't know what's going to go on, but you continue to just trust that I had a plan for you. this was my plan for you because I wanted you to meet this guy that was going to put you in a position of prosperity. He was going to be able to take care of you, cater to your needs, and then I wanted you to be able to bear a child that's going to basically essentially be the grandmother to David, which is going to fall down that line of Jesus as well. And so we know it's a divine intervention that God always has a plan that is better than our plan, and God is always faithful to his plan, even when it doesn't look positive and things like, I don't know where this is going, he has a plan to work it out, right? And so we notice that Ruth showed faithfulness and God rewarded it. Now, on the flip side, I talked about God's faithfulness. And we look at Naomi. Naomi was bitter. Naomi was essentially unaccountable to the decisions that she made, and she felt like God's hand was against her. But God wanted to tell you that, hey, I love you regardless of how you feel about me, regardless of how you blame me, regardless of what you're doing. I always love you, and I'm always going to show my love to you whether you choose to receive it or not. And so it says that when they gave her the baby, because Naomi tried to change her name to Mara, which meant bitter because she felt like God was against her, versus her name was Naomi, which meant pleasant and sweetness. So she had a really positive name that she wanted to change. And then now God said, okay, boom, I'm going to bring a child into this world. And he says he will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. So this child was brought in to bring joy, all the joy she felt like she had lost over the past 10 plus years. He's like, I'm about to restore this right here with this child. And this child is going to bring you all that joy and more for the remainder of your life. And so it highlights God's faithfulness in providing the family redeemer to take care of to bring a new son in the world. And when you really look at a bigger picture, it's essentially a small version of God sending Jesus back to be our kinsman redeemer and save us in this world as well, and renew us in our age and renew us in our life as well. So it's a full circle moment that highlights the future as well. So keep in mind that the flow is always at work, even when the circumstances around us don't seem like they are. It's just a matter of the opportunities lining up. All we have to do is follow through. And that is the book of Ruth. I hope you guys received that. So now it is offering time here at Enlighten. And as you guys know, it's the same every single week, so we have all the same different options to give. You have text to give. You can put the number 770-769-1293, text the word give, and you can put your dollar amount in there. If you want to give online, just go to ecclive.org/giving. You can give that way. If you're more into Cash App, it's $ECC Live. And then if you want to mail your offering in, mailbox P.O. Box 156, Marietta, Georgia 30061. And last but not least, if you have cash or a check and you wanted to put in the offering envelope, there's envelopes in front of your seat. You can fill one of those out. Coordinators can give you one if you don't see one there. But in the meantime,